Random enlightened commentary.
I came across this topic that I thought was really interesting, and truth be told, I did think about this concept in the past at different points, but it was really today that I got to think about it more after I watched a video on this idea of a dying nuclear family. And for me, I did not necessarily come from a nuclear family, or rather, it wasn't a nuclear family all the time. Like, for the most part, I came from a single parent household. So this idea of the nuclear family, which, you know, I grew up with watching different movies, and this perpetuation of the nuclear family being streamlined into, you know, the more mainstream context of people's everyday lives, it's only natural that I think about this topic from time to time. But when I thought about it, I realized that this idea of the nuclear family wasn't the original form of what we think of as a family. If we go to the earlier parts of human history, we can see communities raising up the next generations. People within the community would make mutual contributions in order to raise up the next generation. And I'm sure that's where the phrase, "it takes a village to raise a child," came from. And when we go through history and, you know, over time, as values change, as lifestyles change, as resources change, we see this shift into what we know today as a nuclear family. And well, not necessarily today, because we're seeing another shift actually happening today. We're seeing either people are delaying like having a family, or, you know, staying single for longer. We're also beginning to see these blended households as well, more single parent households, and so on and so forth. There's so many different types of families that have come about from where we started. And I think it's kind of funny that we hold this idea of a nuclear family to a pedestal. And yes, does it have its benefits? Yes, you have more people making contributions, but what's to say that another family type doesn't have its pros as well? I think we hold it to a pedestal, quite honestly, in the mainstream context, because a lot of rules and policies that governments have enacted was around this idea of a nuclear family unit. And of course, if that keeps dissolving into what it is now, where you have different familial types, they won't really have a way to classify what the new definition of today's family looks like under the different policies that have been put in place. It's kind of the similar idea of what we're facing with people who are not either deciding not to get married, or not marrying at an earlier age, or, you know, getting divorced even. There are rules and policies in place within this country that are more favorable to people who are married opposed to people who aren't. I think it all relates to that, and that's why we're seeing it so much. But I just found it very interesting that it was being held to such a high degree, when in reality, we're not talking about the different familial types that are out there and their bearings on history as well, because it's not like these different familial types started recently. They were always there to some degree, but now, and I'm sure this has to do with media and us being more connected, we're seeing different types of families arising. I think we should talk more about this idea that it all comes down to contribution, rather than it coming down to family type. Like, you can have a nuclear family, but maybe not everyone's making their contribution. In another scenario, you could have a nuclear family and everyone is making a contribution to help raise that next generation. You could have a community making contributions. You can have a community not making contributions. You can have a single parent household making contributions or not making contributions. So I think it all comes down, I think the common denominator in any of these scenarios is the manner and frequency of contributions being made. And when I mean contributions, I'm talking about resources, whether they be tangible or intangible. they're actually a bit of both, honestly. Contributions being made to raise up that next generation so they can be healthy, competent individuals. I think it comes more so to that rather than to what type of family did they come from. And once we get that, I think we'll be able to get to the root of a lot of these issues surrounding any familial context.